It was really poor from a team competing for the Premier League title. They looked devoid of ideas, devoid of inspiration, devoid of energy. Everything that if you're an Arsenal fan, you wouldn't want to see at the business end of the season.
They were tepid and they were toothless. And they really didn't look like scoring a goal, which is a big problem if you're coming up against Manchester City next weekend.
Certainly the attacking third, which is the major issue, and they don't look like they believe they're going to create these chances.
Big players have gone missing in big moments. It's difficult to go and try and play for a draw, but that's almost certainly what Arsenal will do. I don't see them going there and trying to go toe-to-toe with Manchester City.
But they do smell blood, though, you fear, Manchester City.
I think it's a triumph for the fact that Pep Guardiola is trying to win games in the right manner, whereas it feels to me that for several weeks now, Mikel Arteta has been too pragmatic, just trying to get his team over the line, and when they need to chase a game, as they did at the weekend and in the League Cup final, they don't have that capability. So I think the big issue for Arsenal is the playing style is proving prohibitive in terms of them getting over the line.
Manchester City have actually drawn 6 of their last 13 Premier League games, so consistency isn't there for them either.
I think we will see twists and turns because of the nature of the league. Never underestimate the capacity of English football fans to love something that's funny. And if Arsenal don't win the league, it's really funny.
Arsenal wobbling in the title race, but I wonder if they can take a bit of inspiration from Rory McIlroy, who had a little bit of a wobble on Saturday before straightening his putter, and Alex Crook, who changes his mind so often he's got more turns than an Augusta fairway. However, boy, do they need a little bit of good fortune, because I worked out this week, Crook, that by Wednesday night of next week, the 22nd of April, we could be in a situation where Manchester City are top of the league.
Yeah, incredible turn of events, really. And obviously, we were all glued to the Masters last night. There were those emojis doing the rounds of Rory McIlroy decked out in an Arsenal kit on one of the tee shots. But he's got the job done because he was a class act in the field. And I do wonder if Pep Guardiola is going to be the Rory McIlroy of the Premier League this season, and Mikel Arteta is going to be the Justin Rose. So close, but no cigar. Once again, it was a comfortable win for Manchester City at Chelsea. We were both there. They've slashed the goal difference. I think they're more than capable of beating Arsenal at the Etihad next weekend. The game you talk about is Burnley away. If there's one team you want to play in your game in hand when you need goals, it's not the worst trip on paper, is it, to Turf Moor? So, yeah, fascinating to see what happens over the next 10 days or so.
So, have you changed again? Are you going Manchester City now?
I am going Manchester City now.
Oh!
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm pleased you're consistently inconsistent. I love that. Kev, how are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good.
Liverpool won this weekend, so you can smile.
That's why I'm smiling. It's rare.
Been a bad couple of weeks for Arne Slot. I mean, we'll get into it, I'm sure, at some point later on. Maybe we won't touch on it today because we did it last week, really. But I think sometimes we, on the outside, will suggest that things are happening. We spend a lot of time in these places, so I think we pick up a little bit more information. We're not just speculating into stuff that we say. It's because we've heard it, we've seen it, and we've been there. But I think sometimes people think that, we amp it up a little bit. But I do think there's quite a bit of ill feeling towards Arne Slot amongst Liverpool support, and you're probably as well placed as anyone just to confirm that for us.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and I think the style of play, I think, has been a problem. I think if you look at how slowly Liverpool have started games at times, if you look at the press hasn't been as fast and furious as it would be under Jurgen Klopp, I just don't think it's as visceral, as thrilling as it was in the Klopp era. And I think, obviously, with it going so well last season, I think those Slot and Klopp comparisons didn't come to the fore, but I think they very much do now. It has been a hugely disappointing season, but it's also been a really difficult season for so many reasons. And I think he's carried himself well personally, but I think some of the performances recently have been damning. I think the collapse at Manchester City, to see so many Liverpool fans walk out at that stage, I think was jarring to see, unusual to see. And then actually, and we might touch on it later, but I thought the performance against PSG was bizarre, quite frankly. I could understand what he was trying to do, but to do it in such an enormous game against such quality opposition they were really lucky that they got away with the 2-0 defeat. So yeah, I think the key is it's not an online thing. I think there are lots of fans that regularly go to the games who are starting to lose patience with this.
Could be worse though, Kev, couldn't it? I mean, you could be Chelsea. Right, let's get into the action then, starting with the title race. And if you can hear that odd noise in the background, then that's just the distant sobbing of a few Arsenal fans realising that maybe the year of the Gunners might be becoming a distant memory. Don't overreact. Here's a question for you. After Chelsea lost at home to Manchester City 3-0, would it be a triumph for the neutral who wants more entertaining football if Manchester City win the Premier League? Alex Crook.
You're asking a Manchester United fan that question, or the chief?
On purpose.
Yes, probably. If you're asking me which of the two teams would I pay to watch, it would be Manchester City. I'd rather watch Antoine Semenyo and Rayan Cherki than Gabriel and William Saliba, who are probably Arsenal's two best players this season. I think it's a triumph for the fact that Pep Guardiola is trying to win games in the right manner, whereas it feels to me that for several weeks now, Mikel Arteta has been too pragmatic, just trying to get his team over the line. And when they need to chase a game, as they did at the weekend and in the League Cup final, they don't have that capability. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many points to this, but I think the big issue for Arsenal is the playing style is proving prohibitive in terms of them getting over the line. And he's going to have big questions to ask Mikel Arteta if they don't win the Premier League from here. And who knows what's going to happen in the Champions League. I watched Bayern Munich against Real Madrid last week, as you did, Sam. Again, I'd rather pay to watch them. And it wouldn't surprise me if it comes to a final in Budapest that Harry Kane gets the job done for them and Arsenal end up trophyless.
It is interesting because the pressure is well and truly on now after that victory from Manchester City and Arsenal dropping points. And I thought that the contrast was quite stark. I always think when you go first and you slip up, it gives extra impetus to those that are around you. But the truth is, Kev, when you look back over the course of the last 13 games, Manchester City have actually drawn 6 of their last 13 Premier League games. So consistency isn't there for them either. Can you see this being as linear as Manchester City coming up on the rails and coming right way through the pack to win the title? Or do you think we're going to have some more twists and turns over the next few weeks? Because, of course, they play each other next Sunday afternoon.
I don't see City winning out from here because I think it's been like that all the way through. You know, you've had teams that haven't been able to put together the runs we've seen in the past. I mean, City have had title races where they've put together, you know, winning streaks that have been in double figures. I don't think it's that league at the moment. I think there are two, and we saw this with Bournemouth going to the Emirates. I think there are so many teams now that could give the top sides a game. I think the gap between the title challengers in the Premier League and a lot of the rest of the league, I think, has narrowed. And I think there's been smart recruitment. Everybody's got money, pretty much. And I think what we're seeing now is you have to work so hard just to win one game. Mm-hmm. And so I think we will see twists and turns because of the nature of the league. I think the other thing about neutrals, never underestimate the capacity of English football fans to love something that's funny. And if Arsenal don't win the league, it's really funny for anybody who's not them, because I think we like that. I think we like teams that
because we're horrible.
Do it.
We are horrible.
We are horrible. Of course we are. Football fans are horrible. English football fans are really horrible. And if we see Arsenal slip up again, you know, 4 times in a row, it is quite amusing. And that you know, Mikel Arteta is so serious and focused and kind of really locked in. That makes it even more funny. I like elements of what Arsenal do. I have a lot of respect for the way they play without the ball. But yes, on that visceral base level, it would be funny if they fail again.
One of the things that Pep Guardiola's team had a problem with in the first part of the season was second halves. They really struggled in second halves. Like up until recently, actually, it was a real problem for them. It now feels as if their first halves are pretty boring, really. But they then go and get the job done. Do you think that's a tactic? Do you think they've been a little bit more conservative in the first halves in order to make sure that they've got the firepower that's required in the second?
Well, I think they showed Chelsea a lot of respect in the first half on Sunday, and then when they realised that Liam Rossini's team weren't capable of hurting them, they stepped it up and they've won with a little bit in hand. I actually think they probably declared at 3. They could have scored as many goals as they wanted, but I take your point. The second halves have been an issue, so maybe they're changing their playing style slightly. I'm just looking at the run-ins here. On paper, I don't think either team have got too daunting a run-in. Obviously, the toughest game for either is going to be that game at the Etihad next weekend. In terms of Arsenal, West Ham away 3 weeks before the end of the season could be tricky. West Ham fighting for survival, a team that have caused Arsenal problems in the recent past. And for Manchester City, I think their toughest game, other than Arsenal, is a trip to Bournemouth on the penultimate weekend. They've still got a game against Crystal Palace that needs to be rearranged, but both of them have winnable games on paper. Obviously, it doesn't always pan out that way in the title race. There is a chance, isn't there? Quite a strong possibility that the title may well come down to goal difference.
It could come down to the tightest of little margins, couldn't it? Because these two probably about as good as one another in terms of over the course of the season. Manchester City's first half of the season, nowhere near it. And Arsenal's second half of the season has probably seen a massive drop-off. I think with Manchester City, they've become a little bit more ruthless, but they've done that even though Erling Haaland still isn't really scoring a lot of goals, Kev. I mean, yes, he's picked up recently. I think he got a hat-trick against your mob the other week. However, it hasn't been, I don't know, the goals haven't been free-flowing in the Premier League. And I think that's sort of partly down to what you were talking about earlier, about how hard every single game is, even for someone of his abilities.
Yeah, that's right. And they've had to find different ways to score. And I think Nico O'Reilly's, explosion of goal production has been really, really welcome and shows just what an intelligent footballer he is. Shows how they're finding different ways to unlock defences. It's not about Haaland trying to bash his way through. I thought Cherki was phenomenal in this game, and I'm so pleased to see him being given the freedom to do what he can do, because that pass through to Gay was all Cherki. That's what he's all about. Those kind of moments of inspiration and technique. He's a little bit like Olise, not in the sense that they do play slightly differently, but what I always think with those two is the technique comes as standard. That bit you don't have to worry about. It's just what idea they've had, and then the technical quality to actually make it happen. That just is going to happen. So just instinctive, phenomenal. And they've got so many ways they can hurt you. Doku is another one. I love Doku. I know that he's, as a coach, he'd drive you absolutely crackers because he gets in so many good positions and then the end product doesn't come. But that guy one-on-one is one of the best on the planet in terms of beating a man. So they have developed this way of being able to score in different ways. And look, what's the defence going to focus on most of the time? Stopping Haaland. So if they do that, you've got to find other ways to score. And that's exactly what they're doing.
And a lot of shots on goal yesterday as well, didn't they? Antoine Semenyo similarly had quite a few when maybe probably should have shifted responsibility on elsewhere. And there was a tweet doing the rounds because I think he sent an Instagram post or something saying good performance and then praising or whatever. I can't remember what it was he was doing in the picture. And then underneath it, someone had said pass to Erling Haaland. And Erling Haaland responded saying, agreed, which was quite funny. They do smell blood, though, you fear, Manchester City. And they have got some stellar performances. And at the back, they look so much more secure. Mark Gay, he's settled in. I thought he would. Kusanov playing very, very well. There was one raking pass that he played as well, which was just sublime. And I don't think I've stopped drooling over that Cherki pass for Mark Gay's goal, actually. It was so good. But one of the things I'd said to Crook moments before he scored was, oh my God, how big is Nico O'Reilly? When we're at Chelsea, we're in this sort of press box, which is probably the lowest, I think, in the whole country. We sit right behind the dugout. So you're at pitch level and you get a real sort of sense of the speed of the ball, the speed of the players, the powerful nature of each of them. And O'Reilly was playing on the left-hand side in the second half and he was right in front of us. And I was like, He is almost as big as Dan Burn. He's absolutely massive, and he's only going to get bigger as well. And then he popped up and scored that goal. And Andre Santos decided that wouldn't be a good idea to mark him. But anyway, that's a different matter. Should we have a quick word on Chelsea before we move on to that Arsenal game in detail? There was quite an exodus towards the end, Crook, and I had a little bit of a rant saying Pochettino didn't want to work there, Maresca didn't want to work there, Enzo Fernandez no longer wants to work there, Cole Palmer wants to go home, and there's a reason for that, isn't there?
Yeah, I wrote a piece on the talkSPORT website, my weekly opinion column, and while Manchester City was a story in terms of the title race, I felt like Chelsea was a bigger story in terms of how far they've fallen, not beaten City since that Champions League final in 2021, and it feels like a completely different football club. And you're right, the empty seats at the end spoke volumes, because there wasn't even the mood of anger inside Stamford Bridge. It was more a mood of apathy, that they know they're not a serious football club anymore. One of the points I made is that Liam Rossini is not necessarily to blame, but no serious football club in terms of competing for the Premier League and the Champions League would have appointed the manager who'd been fired by Hull City in the recent past. That is a simple fact. Liam Rossini would not be in the conversation when it comes to who might manage Manchester United at the end of the season, or Liverpool if Arne Slot departs. So that tells you all you need to know about Chelsea. Enzo Fernandez has been publicly flogged almost for making advances over a move to Madrid. But who can blame him? Because he is a World Cup winner who presumably wants to challenge for the biggest honours at club level. And Chelsea are not that football team anymore. I think if I was a Chelsea fan, I would be furious with what Blue Co have done. And unless they change their remit, it's not going to get better anytime soon. You look at the league table, Liam Rossini is talking up their prospects to qualify for the Champions League. I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be more worried about if you're going to qualify for one of the secondary or even the third competition in the Conference League, because it's not up that Liam Rossini needs to be looking. It's those teams coming from behind.
Can I just make a point about Enzo Fernandez, by the way? Players, as long as we've been in this business, go away on international break and say mad stuff in interviews. They get asked all kinds of things. There's always stories about, oh, well, maybe I'd go here, maybe I'd go here. That happens all the time. It felt to me like a real overreaction. And this 2-game ban was so arbitrary. Like, if you wanted to make a point, it was so self-destructive as well. If you wanted to make a point, all right, do the Port Vale game, fine. You're not going to lose that, are you? But then to ban him for Man City for giving an interview where, okay, made overtures towards Real Madrid, fine. But was it that damaging? Was it that necessary? And then all the stuff about he needs to talk to the leadership group. He needs to be welcomed back in. It's nonsense, honestly.
It is nonsense, and there's a reason it's nonsense. And the reason is this: Chelsea is a football club now, second, and a player trading arm first. And that is what is really upsetting for Chelsea supporters, because they're not competing for the prizes that they used to regularly. And the truth is, if you're Enzo Fernandez and you've been bought into a model which is set up to buy players and then sell them at inflated prices, the whole model dictates that your biggest stars end up moving on anyway. So the idea that he's out of order for thinking about following through on that philosophy is absolutely ridiculous, really, when you think of it, because they're going to move on a few other players for profit further down the line. They moved on Noni Madueke without a blink of an eye. They only had him there for 2 years, less than that, in fact. And then they made a profit on him, so they sold him. And if they thought they could get money out of Enzo Fernandez, they would. The issue with Fernandez is this: they spent far too much on him in the first place, over £100 million, and they're never going to get that back. So that's why they won't sell him. That's why they don't want to sell him, because they know they'll lose money, not make money on him. It's all about money, and that's the biggest problem at Chelsea, and that's why there's empty seats. That's why there's fan frustration. And I don't care if you're a Chelsea fan or you're not a Chelsea fan. We've said this several times on the podcast. Chelsea are the blinking red light of the Premier League. They are telling you this is not how it can be, because if you are prioritising player trading and profits first and football second, I get you have to be sustainable. I get that you can't be reckless with your spending. But if you are almost just having football as a sideline for your player trading arm, then you are completely in the wrong business. It's not for us. Right. Let's talk about Arsenal and Bournemouth. Bournemouth winning by 2-1. I said, I think, on the last podcast, Andoni Iraola would have had 3 weeks to work out his game plan with Arsenal and have time on the training ground, and that was going to be a problem. And so it proved, Crook.
Yeah, and you weren't the only one who thought that. I spoke to a Premier League manager over the weekend, and he said to me that Bournemouth were the worst team you want to face when they've had 3 weeks to work on their game plan. They play with such high energy that freshness was always going to be a problem. But I do think this was more about how poor Arsenal were than how good Bournemouth were. Take nothing away from the Cherries. I think quietly they've had an excellent season under Andoni Iraola. They're one of those sides who might fancy finishing above Chelsea and getting into Europe in the final weeks of the season. But it was really poor from a team competing for the Premier League title. They looked devoid of ideas, devoid of inspiration, devoid of energy. Everything that if you're an Arsenal fan, you wouldn't want to see at the business end of the season. I mentioned it to you on air on Sunday. It was 2 years ago this weekend. They lost at home to Aston Villa and their title challenge unravelled very quickly. Are we seeing history repeating once again?
I don't see how they go to Manchester City next week, Kev, and win that game. I suppose for Mikel Arteta, the good news is they don't have to. If they go there and draw, that's probably a good result for them right now.
That's the key. It's a totally different dynamic in the sense that what I felt against Bournemouth was that from the get-go, they felt the pressure of having to win the game and they didn't know how to handle it. And Bournemouth were absolutely outstanding. But this is different because this is what he's all about. He's very, very good at setting up teams when they don't have the ball. And we've seen them do this before against City at times. And I think if he has to go there and set up and look to not give anything away, they've got more of a chance. Just on Bournemouth, by the way, if they qualify for Europe, Iraola's manager of the season, hands down. Hands down. Because you cannot lose the players he's lost. They've not lost a game since Semenyo left. How does that work? They've lost Semenyo, they lost Kerkez, they lost Housen, they lost Sabani, the goalkeeper changed, or, you know, the players they've lost time and time and time again. How does he do it? It's sorcery. It's absolutely extraordinary. So
some might say it's good coaching. I mean,
well, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. You know, if they qualify for Europe, I think he's manager of the year, because if you're looking at pure coaching job, it's him. So what they did was they absolutely they're a nightmare against top teams anyway, but they played on Arsenal's nervousness, I think, and they really went at them. And he's done this for years. You look at when he was at Rayo Vallecano, regularly bloodied the noses of the top teams. So this is what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, it is. But I don't necessarily agree with you being manager of the year, because if Keith Andrews gets Brentford into Europe, he may well have a sniff at that as well. And it was quite interesting, actually, reading some of the group chats over the weekend. I heard Alex Crook, who had said that he wasn't good enough for MK Dons in July, calling him out as the manager of the year if he gets them into Europe on Saturday afternoon on talkSPORT, which I thought was the ultimate crooky twist and turn. Brilliant. And that's all because he calls him Crookie, by the way, and because he realised he was on the wrong horse there and he better jump on that Keith Andrews bandwagon very, very quickly. Let's talk about Victor Gyökeres, because he scored a very good penalty. He did a lot of good running, but he didn't create any chances, didn't get any chances. I said, I think in the at the end of the commentary, Crook, they were tepid and they were toothless. And they really didn't look like scoring a goal, which is a big problem if you're coming up against Manchester City next weekend.
It is, and I think it's difficult to go and try and play for a draw, but that's almost certainly what Arsenal will do. I don't see them going there and trying to go toe-to-toe with Manchester City. In terms of Gyökeres, the more I watch Arsenal, the more I think he's a half-decent striker. You know, he certainly knows where the goal is. His record actually is not too bad. But I just don't think he suits this team. You know, he's not somebody who makes his own opportunities, and he's not getting the supply from out wide. It's a little bit like when Rasmus Højlund was at Manchester United. I actually think Gyökeres is a better player than Rasmus Højlund. So I think it would be unfair if they don't win the league to blame Gyökeres, because I think he would argue, you know what? My chance conversion rate is pretty good. I've done my job.
Yeah.
The players around me who've not necessarily done theirs.
He's not getting any help whatsoever, is he, Kev?
No. He isn't. You look at his time at Sporting, and I know it's a different league. I know it's an inferior league. I know Sporting dominate a lot of games. But look how many chances he gets to run at people in terms of that early ball, and he gets a bit of space one-on-one. He can knock it, and then he can hit a shot. Now, this is the Premier League. I get you're not going to get to do that as often. But he does seem isolated. And I actually think he's done really well. I think you look at the goal record, it's pretty good.
18, yeah.
He's just fired Sweden to the World Cup. Again, I know that's against, not the same quality of opposition you get in the Premier League necessarily. But I think there's a really good striker in there. But I don't think they needed a centre forward, is the truth of it. I think, Kai Havertz is what Arteta wants, ultimately. He doesn't want an out-and-out striker. I was really surprised that they kind of bent to the narrative, because the narrative was, if they get a striker, they'll definitely win the league. And it's like, well, that was never what they were all about. Havertz was about being physical, but holding the ball, linking the play, bringing the wingers into play. And you've ended up with a totally different type of player. Now, a lot of that is down to the fact that Havertz has been injured. But I just think Gyökeres was onto a loser from the start, because he was expected to be the Messiah, and that was never going to happen because they just don't look comfortable with the centre forward. I was really surprised that they kind of bent to that narrative and spent all that money on a guy that they probably didn't need. Doesn't mean he's not a good striker.
Yeah, I just wonder, and you talked about his style of knocking the ball past the defender, running, shooting, goal. If you look at the statistics from the last couple of years in Portugal, he has so many shots. Like, he has just loads and loads of shots, but he hasn't been able to do that in the Premier League. But also, I just wonder whether or not Premier League defenders, if you're playing in the Premier League, they are that much quicker. And he does just struggle to get away from them. So when those balls do go down the side, he just hasn't got that acceleration, that little bit of extra Usain Bolt power to get into those advanced areas, which I think is another thing which is just holding him back a little bit. Defensively, they've been so good, Arsenal. It's been the bedrock of what they've done over the course of the last few years, but they weren't very good on Saturday. The mishap with the first goal, where Saliba's body shape's not right for me, and he deflects it into the air, and it's popped in by Crook at the far post, who just seemed to want it a little bit more than everybody else. And the second goal, where it's like the parting of the Red Sea, and Alex Scott just wanders through it. It seems a little bit odd. He played really well, actually, Alex Scott, and I think he's a little bit unfortunate that he didn't get in the England squad this time around in the March internationals. Bearing in mind they'd called him up before, and we were talking in the group chat yesterday, actually, a few of us, about the idea of those March internationals actually not really giving us much indication as to what's going to happen at the World Cup. Do you think he could still go?
I don't, to be honest. I just think there's too much competition for those midfield places. But I think he was unlucky not to be called up last time so that Tuchel could have another look at him. I do think you talked about, Kev's mentioned the number of players that Bournemouth have had to sell. I think he's very much the next cab on the rank. There's been a little bit of tentative talk about Manchester United. If they sign one big hitter and then maybe a slightly cheaper option, I think he's got all the capabilities to go and play right at the top level. He's got their intelligent football brain. I think he's capable of scoring more goals. I think he's box to box, to be honest. I think he can pick a pass. I think he's got his defensive head on his shoulders when he needs to. As I say, I think he can probably add more goals than he scored over the course of his career. He's certainly got a spectacular finish in him. I just think he's a really good footballer. And again, a great advert for the EFL, which has been a happy hunting ground for Bournemouth in recent years.
Yeah, I wonder where he fits into the England system. I mean, we expect them to play with a sort of 4-1, 1.5, and a 10. So they sort of almost like a 6-8 and a 10 in midfield, and sort of three-man jagged midfield. But Rice obviously fulfills the role of the 8 at the moment, and Anderson is playing as the deeper lying midfield player. Is he a sort of alternative for Rice? Is he another 10? If he is, that's going to be difficult for him to get into, isn't it? Because we've got so many of those. So I just wonder where he fits into that dynamic. He didn't actually get a minute when he was called up previously, so
no, that
it'll be interesting to see what happens
I
there
like the
going
personality
forward.
he plays with, though. He's quite chippy, isn't he? I quite like that.
The Guernsey Grealish, he's got a little bit of that about him, hasn't he?
Yeah, I quite like that. I think there's a real player there. I think it's not for now. I think a couple of years down the track, maybe. But I think he's getting better all the time. the intelligence of the run, the way that he took the finish for the winning goal, very, very impressive. I do think there's a real player there, and he took over parts of that game. Really good.
Interesting. I think Crook asked Perry Groves on Sunday and Alan Pardew whether or not they would take them out for a meal. Was that you? I can't remember. Take
No, it wasn't
Arsenal
me.
out for a meal, get them all together, try and sort of dust them down and do a bit of team bonding over the weekend. And I think Alan Pardew said no, he wouldn't do that. He would read them the riot act. Now, I actually think he's been really kind to his players, Mikel Arteta, over the course of the season. And I think like sometimes he's walked into press conferences after defeats and he said, I love my players more than ever. I trust my players. They're brilliant players, all this kind of stuff. But actually, when I spoke to him on Saturday afternoon, he was furious and he did not say any of that. It was, this is a punch in the face. This is a disappointment. And I think we might see a more bullish Mikel Arteta. And I think that's what they need right now, Crook.
Yeah, agreed, because big players have gone missing in big moments. You know, Declan Rice looks like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders at the moment, having carried the weight of the team for much of the season. Zubimendi, I think I saw an apology from him on social media, not for the first time this season. I think his performances of late have left a lot to be desired. Gyökeres you've talked about, but, you know, I'd look at Gabriel Martinelli and Madueke. Have they done enough to create the opportunities? And defensively, you know, Gabriel was really poor in the FA Cup game against Southampton and wasn't great at the weekend either. So big players are retreating into their shell at just the wrong time. Miles Lewis-Skelly, there's been a big clamour, hasn't there? Why is Lewis-Skelly not getting more opportunities? I think if you watch his last few performances, you realise why he's not anywhere near Arsenal's first 11.
I actually thought, especially in the first half, he played all right. He was the one sort of setting the tone. There was one particular moment where he was second favourite for the ball. Someone pulled out and he nipped in really quickly and put Arsenal on the front foot. I think the issue is when they get up to that edge of the penalty area, it's all just very staccato. There's not enough quickness and movement, and there's not enough sort of invention there. They've lacked a little bit of that. I think they miss. I tell you what, I think they miss Jurrien Timber. Those runs that he makes on the inside right channel, defenders don't know how to deal with that because the central defender doesn't want to go out to Timber. The fullback's got to deal with the winger, and the midfield players largely ignore them because he's a right fullback and they've got somebody else to worry about. So it's sort of it messes with their brain. It messes with the defending team's brain when he's in the team.
It's all about movement and rotations, right? The best teams, you look at Bayern, we talked about Bayern earlier on briefly. You look at the way they use their fullbacks. You know, you get Conrad Lima in certain positions, Alphonso Davies now that he's fit. Tom Bischoff, even who's a midfielder, plays there. What they do is they double up, and sometimes they'll underlap, sometimes they'll overlap. But what it does is it creates doubt in the mind of the defender. If you don't have that, and Timber's brilliant at that, as you say, if you don't have that, it's a lot easier to defend against your winger.
It's predictable, right?
And Madueke couldn't get in the game, I didn't think. Had a poor game. I like him, but he needs help, and he didn't have that. So, yeah, I agree with you completely. The rotations, I think a fully sharp fit at the top of his game, Ødegaard makes a difference. I think, and, you know, we haven't seen that enough. So, yeah, it's certainly the attacking third, which is the major issue, and they don't look like they believe they're going to create these chances.
Yeah, Ødegaard not available at the weekend. Saka not available at the weekend. Not the time for that, I'm afraid, and that's a bit of a disappointment for Arsenal. They've got a midweek game against Sporting. They should get over the line there, Kev, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they should. And the reason for that mainly is that they've done the hard part by going to the Alvalade and getting the win. Sporting are much stronger at home than they are away. It's not a slam dunk, because if they play like they played on Saturday, Sporting, I think, will be able to sense that and be able to create chances. But I think if you want a good example of the difference between Sporting at home and Sporting away, you only need to look at the last tie against Bodø Glimt, because they went to Norway, lost 3-0, were appalling, and then in the reverse fixture were utterly superb from the get-go, swarmed them and won 5-0. So Arsenal going there, surviving a bit of a scare, in truth. David Raya had to play really well. I think they've done the hard part, and I think they will go through.
Okay, let's move on to the bottom of the table. There was a big fight in Tottenham on Saturday night, but maybe it's Spurs who have suffered a knockout blow. Christian Romero coming off in tears. Roberto De Zerbi's first game in charge of Tottenham ends in defeat away at Sunderland, and for the first time since 2009, Tottenham Hotspur are in the bottom three of the Premier League. West Ham's win on Friday night did for them. That put them in there. They had the chance to drag themselves out at the Stadium of Light, but they could not. Okay performance first 45, a very Tottenham performance second 45. It was a result that Sunderland deserved, I think, Crook.
100%. And I was surprised so many pundits expected Tottenham to go to the Stadium of Light and win. I know their recent home form has deserted them a bit, but it's still been a really tough place to go over the course of the season. This is a Tottenham side who still haven't won in the Premier League in the calendar year. I could only see one outcome. Yes, they showed a little bit more fight in the first half. You'd expect that from a new manager. But the old traits were still there. You mentioned Romero. Be interested to see how serious that injury is. But he got himself booked within half an hour, so that little discipline is still there. They were wasteful with the opportunities that did come their way. And it was really poor defending for the goal. They gave Sunderland so much room to get the shot off. I think they're in huge trouble now, Tottenham. And I'm looking ahead to next weekend. They're at home to Brighton. 5 wins in 6 for the Seagulls. Fabian Hertzler is another manager who deserves an awful lot of credit for the way he's turned their season around, because the fans were on his back not that long ago. I expect Brighton to go to Tottenham and win. Nottingham Forest at home to Burnley is a game you feel that Forest simply have to get 3 points from. And then you're going to be at Selhurst Park on Monday night. I don't think it's beyond the realms of fantasy at all that West Ham go there and win. And if the results go as I expect, then Tottenham are deep in trouble come the end of next weekend.
For so long, Kev, the question and the phrase that we've been trotting around is that Tottenham are too good to go down. But I wonder actually now, is the question, are they too bad to stay up?
Yeah, I mean, you look at that performance against Sunderland and it wasn't a big surprise. And you saw some elements of De Zerbi football in terms of how high the fullbacks were, how heavily involved they were. But ultimately, they are completely bereft of confidence, completely bereft of rhythm. They don't dominate games. And Sunderland right now are a better team, a more cohesive team, a better coach team. And therefore, it was not a surprise to see Spurs lose the game. And that's the issue. How is he going to get enough good performances out of this collection of individuals? And that's what they are. I mean, you look at some of the guys they've got guys who played in World Cup finals. They've got guys who've gone for big money. They've got guys that top clubs around Europe would want to sign, but they are not a team. And at the moment, there's no real leadership coming there. There's nobody who's really dragging that team forwards. And it is very difficult to see how he gets his ideas across quickly. De Zerbi, I think, is a great coach. I genuinely do. I think he's too combustible at times, but that's just what you have to accept. The issue is going to be, will the players listen? And can he get his ideas across enough in a kind of watered down form to make this work? Because if he can't, they're going down. It's as simple as that. And they've made so many missteps this season. It's just extraordinary. I mean, how do you go from, genuinely, how do you go from Postecoglou to Thomas Frank to Igor Tudor to Roberto De Zerbi? It's absurd. And it's no surprise that Forest have done the same thing. How do you go from Nuno to Postecoglou to Deitch to Pereira? It's brain dead. I cannot understand the thinking behind that strategy, if there is any at all.
Well, that's the key, isn't it? There is no thinking behind it and there is no strategy. And that's why both clubs have found themselves in this position. There's far too much ego flying around. There's too many people trying to make their mark. You've got Marinakis at Nottingham Forest, who just does things on a whim and employs people that either he knows he's worked before or he's got a connection with, rather than thinking about the overall strategy of the football club. And the same at Tottenham. You've got people there who probably haven't ever been in this position before. With all due respect to Vinay, he was very high up at Arsenal, but he was never on the footballing side. Who's in charge of that club now? No one really knows, do they? Because Paratici's left, Rebecca Capelthorne is on guarding leave or has left after being one of the chief transfer negotiators. You've got Johan Langer in the background, who no one really knows what he does. And then you've got Vinay, who's now basically in charge of the day-to-day running of the football club. So it's a real issue, I think. It's a real issue at Tottenham Hotspur, a lack of leadership from the very top, and people who haven't had the experience of being in this situation before. But the truth is, more than anything else, is that if they were to go down, it would be a bigger story than anything else in the Premier League this season. It is a fact. It's a massive football club.
I think it was Gabby who said on one of our Friday shows that Tottenham going down is the biggest story in the Premier League since Leicester won the title. And I agree with that. You know, this is a huge football club. I've never seen Spurs as one of the big clubs in English football. I've got a bit of stick for articulating that. But in terms of the stadium, the training ground, the players they have, the history they have, to drop into the second tier is an absolute disaster. And Kev's right. It's all of their own making. And I wonder those Tottenham fans who basically hounded out Daniel Levy at the start of the season, celebrated his departure like it was going to be a brave new dawn, even though it was basically the same ownership. I wonder how they're feeling now. Because I tell you what, they would not be in this mess if Daniel Levy was still calling the shots. He would not have allowed the situation to drift as it has. And even their managerial appointments. Roberto De Zerbi is a good coach, but he's not what you need in a relegation battle. They should have gone to Sean Dyche. Give him an 18-month contract, even if you plan to sack him at the end of the season. It was pure arrogance. They didn't go down that route because they believe they're too big to go down. That's a problem.
They've given De Zerbi this massive contract. They've said, this
pure
is the project.
Panic. It's blind
He's got
panic.
this long contract. He's going to have say over the transfers. He's going to have this. He's going to have that. I mean, I like him very much. I'm pro De Zerbi as a coach, right? Some of the football he plays, I think, is phenomenal. And there are even guys like Pep take ideas from him.
But his record of taking over teams mid-season is appalling.
Exactly. And, you know, if you box off the coaching part and look at the man, he is tempestuous. There's no doubt about it. Does anybody see him seeing out that 5-year contract at Spurs? No.
He's never stayed anywhere for 5 years. I mean, to be fair, that was one of the points Graham Souness made when he first went in at Brighton, and Souness got hammered for it. But he's right. 2 years is his shelf life, especially at a club as volatile as Tottenham. But I do think their delusions of grandeur, which have got even worse since they won that dog and duck final in Bilbao, has been a big part of their undoing. They see themselves as a team who should be playing in the Champions League season after season. The reality is,
I do think that was a major trophy, though. I do think that was. I do think they should have celebrated that in the way that they did, but
didn't
I
make
agree
them a
with
big
you
club
in the sense
overnight.
that it's probably given them a false position of where they were. I would have kept Postecoglou personally for all the problems. I don't know, he's a difficult man to deal with, but I just think all of that goodwill, all of that forward momentum just disappeared immediately, just disappeared straight away. And Thomas Frank was on to a loser from the get-go.
I'm with you. I think once you've won the Europa League, even though they were bad in the league, you probably earned the right to have 6 months as the manager in the Champions League and looking to build on from there. If you dismantle that and go down a different road straight away and then don't give the resources to the new manager to build a different type of squad, you're going to be in major trouble. I also think there are things that we ignore when we talk about Tottenham. The sheer number of players that have not been available for Thomas Frank, for Igor Tudor, and now for Roberto De Zerbi is massive. But at the same time, you tell me a football club that hasn't had major injuries this season, last season, the season before, since COVID and playing catch up, and then all of the extra games that are put into the calendar, we've had injuries galore everywhere. That is just the nature of the business. So you've got to be able to get over that. You've got to have the strength of character to get over that. But I'm not sure that Tottenham have any of those things. I think it's a real problem. I think it's a sad sight to see Tottenham go down. And I know that lots of people, again, we sort of had the discussion about Arsenal earlier, and Kev said that was funny. And Tottenham going down for a lot of people would be funny. But I don't feel like that with Tottenham. I actually think it's just quite sad, really, that they've gone on this journey, missed so blindingly in the transfer market, and found themselves in a situation where they've been almost sort of left to get on with it now themselves. It feels like we've been a bit deserted by the ownership, really.
Do you know what
You
their
reap what
team is? I was just going to say, I was looking yesterday when I was watching the game. He's a good player. He's a good player. He's a good player. But it's like a team's been put together on Football Manager. And there's no chemistry.
They're all right, though, Kev, aren't they? There's no one that you'd go, oh, I'd take him, or I'd take him.
Yeah, but
Well,
man for man, they're not one of the three worst teams in the league. You know, I said this on Sunday on our show. It's not about ability. It's about attitude and application. And it's a dressing room that stinks.
It's the chemistry. It's the chemistry of the team. You look at, like I said before, players who've gone for massive fees, players who've played in World Cup finals, players who, top clubs were looking at. A player in Palhinha that at one stage was an absolute tackling machine in the Premier League for Fulham.
But why did Bayern Munich cast him aside?
Well, because he wasn't the right fit. It's not because he wasn't good. It's just it's not what Company wants. I mean, Company arrived.
Romero and Van der Ven think they should be playing for Real Madrid.
Yeah, well,
they're not that good. Van der Ven's quick, but how much of that is because he gets himself out of position so often? And Romero,
well, they're tactically indisciplined. They're both of them are tactically so indisciplined. If you look at Romero, you follow Romero's heat map. He's always going out of position, chasing lost causes that he can't do, being a hero, going for the ego tackle, and then finding that he's left a gap behind himself and somebody else has filled it, and it's usually an opponent, and that is a real problem for them. Same with Van der Ven in some senses. He tries to do too much occasionally and then gets himself injured because he's gone on a 90-yard run and then come back and done another one. So, I don't know. I just think that I think they're good players, but I don't think they're great players. I think that the recruitment's been poor. And this is a sort of warning. It's a bit like Chelsea, really. If you end up spending money on players that are potential, or you're going for the cheaper options in the market, then you're going to get the output that you've got. You're not going to be drinking at the top table. You're not. It's just that is a fact. Sunderland, by the way, their recruitment has been absolutely superb. And although Brian Brobby isn't the best centre forward in the league, I tell you what, I wouldn't want to play him every week. He is an absolute nightmare.
They're so good, Sam. They are so good. I have so much respect for the way they've put that team together, for the way that Regis Lebris has coached them. He's an educator. And he is somebody that, he doesn't look like a big personality. He's not a big ranter and raver, but he has got that message across. I love Siddiqui. I think Diarra's played really well. Brobby, as you say, let's not forget, Brian Brobby, many, many people saw him as a busted flush, honestly, because he'd gone to Leipzig, it hadn't worked. At Ajax, he'd been up and down, and people thought, that guy that we thought was going to be a real talent, is it going to work? And Sunderland have played to his strengths. Xhaka's been one of the best signings of the season, no doubt about that. If Tottenham had Xhaka, they'd be much better off. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but what he is an organiser, a leader, a damn good footballer in his own right. But he would not allow some of that chaos that happens at Spurs to go on. He would be pulling players into position. He'd be balling them out. He'd be the right arm of the manager. They don't have enough players like that, Spurs. And you look at the job he's done with Sunderland. He helped Leverkusen to an unbeaten league and cup double. Phenomenal signing and in keeping with what they've done in general.
Yes, they've done a very good job, Sunderland. A quick word for some of the other games this weekend. I think we should probably touch on Newcastle United. I'm not blind, says Eddie Howe, after his team throw away yet another lead. 25 points they've given up from winning positions this season, Crook.
Yeah, and you talk about disenchanted fan bases when it comes to Liverpool. There are a lot of Newcastle fans now who believe a change of manager is needed. Obviously, we've been staunch defenders of Eddie Howe. We know what a wonderful job he did at Bournemouth, and we can appreciate what a terrific job he's done at Newcastle as well, getting them into the Champions League twice, winning that elusive major domestic trophy. But this season has been poor. And as you mentioned, the number of points they dropped from winning positions is a problem. Sunderland look like they're going to finish above them, which, if you're a Newcastle fan, is your worst nightmare. And I am wondering now, is Eddie Howe a bit fatigued as he was at the end of his Bournemouth tenure? And does he have a big decision to make over his future in the summer, because I don't think they can afford to fire him. I don't think necessarily they want to fire him, but it wouldn't surprise me if he decided to walk away.
What do you think, Kev? Because I think with Eddie Howe, he sometimes is underappreciated. If you go back even a couple of years, in the season where they didn't qualify for the Champions League the last time, once they were in the Champions League, so they got into the Champions League, and the season that they were in it, they didn't have a great league season. I think we had these conversations before, and he pulled it out of the fire, and everybody realised just how good he really is. He rebuilt the team, and then they went again. Are you in danger? Are we in danger now as a fan base, as a Premier League, of deciding that if you have a good manager and he has one bad season, or the club has one bad season for a number of different reasons, that's it, we're finished with them. We're done with them.
Yeah, I think football to an extent has always been like that, but I think it's definitely like that now. And I sound like a really old man, but in the social media era, it is tougher. It is, because what it's done is it's brought in a whole slew of opinions from all over the world, everybody. And what happens is people at the top of clubs pay attention to that when they shouldn't, really. You need to look at what is happening in a stadium and what the match-going fans are saying. You need to look at that. But it's really the Premier League, I genuinely think, is as competitive and as tough as it's ever been. Because you look at the sheer concentration of talent there is. You look at the fact that so many teams have money. So we've just talked about one, Sunderland. They've not got loads of money, but they've got enough money to sign quality players. So they can go about their business and they can stick to a plan and they can put together what they do. So not everybody can get in that Champions League every season. This Newcastle team is still growing. They've got super ambitious owners with an extraordinary amount of money, but they can't bring that to bear because of the financial regulations.
I think you've fallen into a trap there, Kev. I'm not sure the owners are as invested as they were, and I think that's part of the problem. I think they've used PSR as a bit of a convenience.
But they're not backing him in the way that they could. But I think they've made.
I don't think they care. I don't think they care as much as they did at the start of the project. Maybe that's because
that's because of PSR, isn't it? Yeah. Because they thought they could come in, they could splash the cash, they could drag the team into the Champions League and go for all these massive prizes. Their grandiose statement of we're going to fight for all of the prizes in global football by 2030. And David Hopkinson, the new CEO, coming on the White and Jordan programme earlier in the season and reiterating that, and then saying odd things about Eddie Howe was weird recently. It all seems a little bit like it's not where it should be. Now, Newcastle United are a big football club, but I think you're right, Kev. In some senses, there's a bit of Newcastle which is like, well, we've done quite a lot in a very short space of time. Do we really think that Eddie Howe's the big problem here? No. Or is there other things that we need to sort out before we worry about, jettisoning one of the best managers in the country?
I think he's done a phenomenal job, actually, because they are building something. They've qualified for the Champions League twice. They've got to the knockout phases of the Champions League. Yeah, they got duffed up by Barcelona, but actually, for a leg and a half, they were on level terms with Barcelona, I feel, in terms of, and yeah, they got smashed in the second half. That can happen. That absolutely can happen. But you put your energy into that, it's going to cost you elsewhere. And, they got beat by Manchester City in the League Cup. Well, okay, that can happen. They won the League Cup. So not what more do you want, but I think there has to be patience. And patience is a really short supply in football across the board, right? But
there is, right. But how many prizes are there that you can win?
They'll benefit. If they stick with him, they'll benefit. He's delivered a League Cup. They could do that again. If they make smart signings in the summer, I know where they want to get to, but it's really difficult to go those final few steps.
But it's not just Newcastle, is it? There's only a certain number of prizes. You can only win the League Cup, the FA Cup, the Premier League, or one of the European competitions every year. That's not many competitions. No. And if you've got Chelsea, Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Newcastle, Aston Villa, Tottenham, all these teams want to win trophies, or all the fan bases, the ownerships think they should be challenging for for Champions League places and trophies. 8 doesn't go into that. It just doesn't work. There are going to be seasons where you're going to be rebuilding in transition and having to go again.
Yeah.
That is going to happen. And if you can't accept that, then I'm afraid you're a little bit deluded. I'm not talking about the fans here. I'm talking about the ownership. You're a little bit deluded. You're going to have seasons where you're going to have to consolidate, think, okay, need to change a few things. Let's go again for next season. If that happens over a couple of seasons, that's a different matter. The sporting director's got to go and the whole thing's got to be ripped up. But I just wonder, having changed the sporting director in the summer, having had a summer without a sporting director, are we really saying that now's the right time to take that experience out of the dugout? Not sure for me.
And good luck to whoever does replace him if Eddie does go, because there's a bit of a clamour for Jose Mourinho, because obviously he's got links with the club from Bobby Robson. As soon as he finds out there's no money to spend, that will quickly unravel. And it's a dressing room full of players who want to leave. Tonali wants out. Anthony Gordon would go if Liverpool came back in again. Livramento's not signing a new contract. Guimaraes' agent is touting him around. So it's a really difficult summer for whoever is in charge.
I think Mourinho would be a disaster. I think it'd be a disaster, honestly. Because I think if you look at Mourinho's recent history, Fenerbahce didn't work. Roma fired him. Benfica, he steadied the ship. They did okay, but they're not going to win the league in Portugal.
He's yesterday's man, Kev, isn't he? He's yesterday's man.
Yeah, I think as well. I think he really didn't do himself any favours with how he spoke around the whole Vinicius Junior Prestiani racism allegation. I thought he really let himself down on that occasion. I think he's burnt bridges with Real Madrid as a result of that. And while I respect the body of work in general, I do feel like we're talking about diminishing returns with Mourinho. And I don't feel like he's taken Benfica forward. I don't feel like he's the transformational figure he was. And actually, there was a game very recently where Benfica dropped points at Casapia and he went on this big, long rant about players don't live and breathe football like I do. I think his connection with squads is diminishing as time goes on. And I just think he's not worth the drama. I don't think he's worth the drama.
If they appoint Jose Mourinho, it is a PR appointment, an ego appointment, rather than a football appointment. He is not going to kick that team forward. And if he does, which has every possibility if he's given the resources to do it, because he's a very talented coach and whatever, and maybe the heady mix of being in the Northeast and it all works, it will be short-lived. It will be short-lived. So even if he does, which I don't think he will, turn this team into world beaters, it will only last a very short amount of time, and it will be built on sand. It will be, as soon as he leaves, that's it. It'll be gone, and he will leave very quickly because it will not go on forever.
He couldn't win he could not win the Premier League with Newcastle, I don't believe, because I just don't think he's a very talented coach. I can't see him winning a league. I can't see him winning a Champions League with Newcastle. So what's the point? What would the point be? Because Eddie Howe's already won a domestic,
and he's not going to be building anything. He doesn't build anything. He's not going to build anything for the future
because he'll want his players. He'll want to change stuff. He'll moan about not getting the players that he wants. He'll moan about not getting the backing, which won't be possible because there's financial strictures. I just don't see how it would be a step. If you said to me, "Get rid of Eddie Howe and bring in Jose Mourinho," does that take you forward? I think it takes you backwards.
Absolutely. And you know what? I love Jose Mourinho. I've got so much respect for him. I think he's a fantastic, wonderful coach who defined basically 2000s football. He was just absolutely sensational in that time. I'm not sure he's sensational 20 years on. I just don't think that he's got the drive. I know he complains about others not having the drive, but I don't think he's got the drive that he used to have. And he definitely hasn't got the patience that he had to show. Or maybe they didn't have patience in the first place. Maybe he had just like a charismatic impatience, which really worked for him. Now he comes across very grumpy and sort of old manish, and players don't respond to that anymore. Right, okay, that's it for Premier League All Access. Remember, we've got the quarterfinal of the Champions League, Sporting coming to Arsenal on Wednesday night live on talkSPORT. Thursday night, the Europa League semi-finals will be decided. The participants will be decided as the quarterfinals come to their conclusion. Will Nottingham Forest end up playing Villa in the semi-final of those competitions, and Crystal Palace should have done enough already to get past Fiorentina, but we shall see. We'll be back on Thursday to preview all the weekend's action, including that big game between Manchester City and Arsenal. Whatever you do, keep it talkSPORT.